We listed on the paperwork or not?
It probably is, but I'm not sure exactly
And
the paper.
it doesn't say that it was rock climbing, it just says that building maintenance.
They're both about 95, I mean, is that?
Well, I mean, assuming, yeah, I mean, they're gonna be very close. Yeah, I mean, there's, the difference in pay is nominal compared to the benefit costs that go with that.
Does anyone have a feeling about, we definitely want to say yay or nay to one of these, or do we just put both of them on the list, or what do people want to do?
I have a question about the maintenance position, the support to events. Can you give us any kind of ballpark about what kind of time that is? I'm thinking mostly for I guess I'm wondering how would we still have events in the business district? And then I know with block parties, what the other options for barricades, like can people park cars to block, block
Or
the-
pick up the barricades.
Or is there a
or-
liability issue with that,
Well, to date, well, at least as of Monday, when I ran the numbers, we had 540, what did I write down? Either 540 or 450 hours.
Yeah, I did.
To date in event support. Now, that includes barricade delivery for block parties. It includes
4th of July.
4th of July, bike race, barbecue, summer concerts. I mean, anything that would be not, our core operations or.
So there is a line item for the bid, for the bike races, I should say, and it's 2,000 specifically called out. And I'm just wondering, for things that are run by organizations, for events like that, is there a different way they can get this done, than asking us to do it? I don't know that answer. Like, is there, pick up the barricades and make sure your organization, it's a requirement per the permit, or the whatever it's called. Special event
I
permit.
certainly think there would be options. For example, I'm not saying they'd be popular, I'm just saying they'd be options. For street festivals, if a road closure is requested, the applicant could be responsible for renting and placement of any required traffic control. And they could submit a plan that the police department or us could sign off on. And then they're responsible for, getting their own traffic control. You could require that, block parties pick up and return their own barricades. That would take a ton of time, free up a ton of time, on our staff. Certainly there's drawbacks to that.
Can I ask a question about that? Because we talked about charging for block parties. Would that $50 charge cover the cost of delivering for barricades?
We talked about it, we didn't approve.
I know.
But I don't think so.
But I just think
Yeah.
if organizations had, I was the only person who supported the charge, but if our concern as a board is that we are not gonna encourage people to have block parties, we're gonna suggest that people pick up the barricades. I think the inclination to pay $50 versus pick up the barricades is like,
Yeah. But now we're talking about man-hour availability.
Right, so
I understand, but that's my question is that if we decided to implement that fee, would that cover
But
that
the person
cost?
doing it's gone, if you eliminate the position.
Right, so.
Right, but I'm just trying to offset some of that cost.
I don't think it's nearly, so if you had, say, 300 block parties times 50, what do you get, 15,000?
I think you have, what, about 50 block, 50 block parties?
50, yeah, so, and then the equipment, just so everyone knows, there's a lot, they have to bring on, they have to maintain the trailers, they have to, so I just feel like there'd be a big.
My larger concern is the man hours required over the nominal fee that you would get in return.
So, I'm not hearing anything in, either one way or the other with these positions.
I support putting the building maintenance position that's vacant on the list, not that I would support that in the end, but just leaving it there, and then really understanding, is that the one you were talking about, special events, that
Yeah.
That, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
so, and then just understanding, we may have to do a level of service reduction in events or whatever it may be, whatever, kind of gives us.
But I mean, in terms of service reductions, I mean, the route collection is, people would need to change, because maybe your garbage is Thursday, not
Right.
Tuesday, but we're still having weekly garbage collection. Then there's a yard waste service reduction there.
So I'd rather it be event, I'm all for reducing yard waste at some point, but
But I mean,
less of a
so
blow.
we're gonna say to camp next year, you have to pay for barricades, and we're gonna say to Three Lions, you need to pay for your barricades and have set up.
Or they, I'm assuming you can make a pickup time, as long as it's before, I don't know if that's possible, but.
I mean,
Not to mention the ghost train closing down Capitol.
yeah,
I
you know,
mean,
to be honest, if people are picking them up, I don't know that it reduces our hours that much, because we still have to have them identified and pulled out of stock and ready and separated by, you know, this is block A's, this is.
I just don't think it's a big deal. We cut the picnic table service this year and no one said a boo. Right? And we used to deliver picnic tables to, the soccer party or one of those parties, and we don't. It just events, you're planning for a big event.
yeah,
Just on events, in going through it, there's, items regarding custom signage and eliminating, there's a lot of custom signage.
We do a fair amount of
For
custom
special
signage.
events.
We do a lot of signage for 4th of July. We do, you know, there's also custom signage related to, you know, specific, you know, very specific parking regulations by certain blocks. Sometimes when they get very wordy or they're complicated, you know, it's easier for us to produce them in-house than to try to have them outsourced.
Why are they so customized?
Hydrogen flushing, as an example.
Yeah, we do
Okay.
that too. So, you know, like, I think around Atwater might be an example, you know, they'll say, from this time to this time you can do this, but at this time of year it's different, and here you need a permit, and so those things we will do ourselves.
So were I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I should have asked it more clearly. Are the custom signs that are talked about of being, service impact and under building maintenance, are those for special events, or are those for other
Some,
permanent
okay,
signs
so
in the
some of
village?
them, both, and yes.
Okay, alright.
One other example of, you know, maybe a service level thing is with the recent monument signs that were installed at the new PD and
Mhm.
some other locations, you know, our staff, dug the holes for those to
Mhm.
reduce the contract cost for the contractor installation. That would be another example of something that if we are cutting the hours in that position, it probably is something we wouldn't be able to do.
Well, what I'm hearing around the table is that there seems to be some support for putting the building maintenance position on the list, but, you know, this is very helpful, but we're just looking at it for the first time. It might need to be something that we take back and we digest. I'm not hearing anybody say, I definitely wanna cut that position, but it might be something we put on the list and say, you know, ask some questions, see what we can kinda cover, see what we can't, and really, think about it going into the budget wrap.
Yeah.
Sure.
Based on the questions you get, maybe just, and your own opinion as the director, like, here are the things that I would recommend.
I mean, you know, the dump truck is, you know, 1.5 I mean, so I guess asking you as the department head, I mean, operationally, it seems like losing either of these positions is a lot more, going to affect your operation and service levels a lot more than the dump truck.
But the dump truck has to be replaced then, next year. I mean, it's still gonna be expense, whereas if you don't fill a position, it's not going to.
Yeah. But I'm just trying to get a sense of,
Yeah. Well, if you'll permit me just to make a 1-minute comment, well, we did a strategic plan in 2013, and I know a lot of you weren't here then and probably haven't seen that document. But one of the things that was pointed out in that is how our organization has changed over the last decade. You know, at its initiation, we had almost 100 employees. We're down to 19 today. And one of the points that document made was that we've been able to reduce our work staff to the point that we're at today entirely because of our fleet and our ability to utilize specialized equipment.
And contracting out maybe, a little bit?
A little bit, but the vast majority of it is that because of specialized equipment and the fleet that we have, you know, we're able to do the things that years ago, we can do it now with 2 when it used to take 10. And that is entirely because of the fleet and the equipment that we have. So that, you know, that's definitely a balancing act, I understand that. So, you know, of course, if you say, Leanne, you get a new truck or you get a person, 100 times out of 100, I'm gonna say I want that person.
Yeah.
But at some point, that person doesn't do us a lot of good if they don't have any equipment to operate.
Okay, that's a good answer.
And your equipment, like, our equipment cost doubled, even, and then, and the staff reduced, so it was like an offset.
Okay,
Very much.
okay, I guess,
I do have one question, before we wrap it up. School fuel and police fuel, no, just fuel. So DPW, it says it's only 17,875 for fuel. And then, is it just for the municipal garage?
I'm sorry, what page are you on?
I think it is.
73, is
Is that
that?
the only place, yeah, and then the police fuel looks like it's 33, is it double? I know it's offset by charging the police, but I'm just looking at the amount of gallons used.
So the top 2 lines are fuel for the DPW fleet, vehicles and equipment.
Okay.
And then because, you know, we maintain the fuel contract, we pay it in its entirety, and then we have to estimate, what the other parties who use fuel will use, and so Chief and I talk about that every year. So then in blue, that just shows, that is ultimately charged back to others.
Okay, so that's the 40 plus the 17. So
Right,
57
correct.
versus 33, okay, then they're not higher, okay.
all right, so are both positions on there or just the building maintenance position?
They're both-
Oh,
on the-
No, on the list, our list.
no, on our list.
Oh,
I just say one of them.
I would say that.
I heard only building maintenance.
Yeah.
Am I, okay.
Did you wanna leave, you're the chair, leave the other one on?
I mean, if that's what people wanna do, what do you guys,
I would just say put, eliminate one position.
okay, well, it sounds like that's good. All right, let's move on. Okay, thank you. Let's go to, I think, I wanted to talk about parking, I wanted to have some time to talk about parking, so I'm wondering if we can get through, and can we go to 8:30? What do people think?
Were we scheduled for, or were we scheduled, I don't remember what we scheduled for.
I don't
This
know,
was
it's
nine,
not
that's what
ending
I'm
time. I guess maybe we can get through utilities and have 10 minutes to talk about future scheduling and be out there by 8:30, okay. Water and sewer, can we get through them quickly and then we'll have time for, I don't have anything on water or sewer. Please, we had the most questions. All right, okay, start with general strategy.
I agree.
Yeah, parking, we basically, yeah, we have that.
Cash cow, we got the cash cow.
Which stick? Parking's on 153.
Ready?
I just noticed on page 152, under services, it says parking spaces and lots as follows, and there's nothing following.
Well,
Do you
that's
do a list of all the parking?
Implying the whole budget, so
Right, I
I
just
will,
wanted to
I will,
point that out.
thank you, though, I mean, that's a good, because think I'm gonna clarify this either way.
Good, because it says tracking of permits. I thought that Duncan does that. Are we just talking about the lot permits? Services?
Well, the utility ultimately tracking the permits, the tool is something.
Okay.
So I guess the concept that Mark brought up was, so right now, all our, any type of permit, whether it's a hardship permit, or a permit to park on Oakland or Capitol, or Wilson, or lots, they're all in parking utility. So Mark said, well, why don't we just keep lots in the utility and we can move, street permits out to the general fund? Would we have, one question I have is, would we have a parking department, or would we put that?
Well, you know, if that's, and again, that's as close to a recommendation as the list is gonna get for your alternative revenues and diversifications. But it's still an option, I mean, it works either way. But since the clerk customer service division facilitates that, I would be inclined just to list those line items and present them within that division, I mean, you know, just for presentation, but we don't have to create a separate department to do that. It just brings the revenues into the general fund.
Right, but
Yeah,
then.
no more than the village manager's actually responsible for state aids, it's just where it's presented.
Oh, so okay,
Would it
so,
affect our levy limits, or, yeah, because we're bringing in fees if it goes to the general fund? Really?
Well, it helps levy limits.
Okay, wait,
it what?
but I
It
thought
helps levy
it's
limits.
revenue coming in though.
Levies limits tax levy. So more revenue than expenses, it reduces tax levy.
I just thought fire was just excused from that formula, and so that they were the only thing, only fees.
Transferring costs out for that would require a levy limit reduction. And that's kind of a whole different than bringing revenues and expenses in, because that doesn't impact your levy limit at all, it just impacts your total expenditures and ultimately levy.
But so we charge to the parking utility court customer service time.
Well, I could summarize this, I gave some thought to this afternoon, so if we're on page 153, I highlighted in blue, in anticipation of this discussion, the street permit revenues. Those total $105,000.
What about Metro?
Was there one
I'm
page?
just talking about
153.
on-street permit revenues, the ones in blue. So those are the $105,000. Those I'm proposing transferring to the general fund with the understanding that I'm gonna ask the board to either pass a resolution or a motion that says, we're gonna define the parking utilities' role and responsibilities to manage off-street parking, basically. I might do a little more elaborate, but on-street parking is the city supports street maintenance, the city supports all these other things. So I think that's a reasonable discussion to have, and it's triggered because there's been a renewed interest in on-street parking in the community and got me thinking about that. So, the other part of that is, I think it makes sense to keep, the principle that the parking utility was formed to deal with the original 1980 acquisition of the 4 municipal lots. And that's just for fun, you just can have that, but I was looking up.
But you
Trying to
take out
find.
overnight parking permissions too, that's on street.
Yeah.
It's just the-
Oh, it's not blue. It's 60 grand, it's not. Am I looking at expenses
You're looking at the wrong year.
Is this an archival
Th-
document?
That's, I have, believe it or not, I have electronic copies of the budgets going back to 74.
1975.
Can I just ask you a really quick question?
Yeah,
What, we're struggling with, what's the benefit when we talk? So, for instance, let me
Okay.
just ask,
let me simplify this.
He's trying to
Getting
tell
there.
us.
If I could tell you that you could charge a finance director $105,000 if I could open my windows on Tuesdays, would you take the $105,000?
no, unless I knew how it happened. So
Okay.
that's why I'm asking.
It's just an organizational,
It's not, but that's why I'm asking the
So,
question.
but wait a second, so you want to, but we'd also have to move the Duncan fees.
Duncan fees are already in the general fund budget.
Oh, okay, okay, because you already moved them, all right.
And I'll even give you one
No,
better.
but these don't have the fees, right? Is that what you're
No,
talking?
wait.
There's no additional fees for these.
Well, I'm trying to get through my discussion point here, if we would like to do that, and then maybe ask questions when we're done. So I'm recommending that an option the board could consider is to define what the parking utilities function is. And the reason I came across that is I was looking for the original authorization for, I couldn't find it, it just happened. In 1980, it shows up on the budget, we've got a parking utility. So, but clearly it was set up to deal with the acquisition of our, and management of our 4 municipal lots. Obviously, it's expanded and blossomed over the last 38 years to where we're at today. But from a accounting and management position, I think it's a reasonable thing for the board to say, parking utilities, off-street parking. If we're selling permits to park on the public streets, we're keeping that in the general fund. Now, the downside on that, so that's $105,000 of revenue coming in to the general fund, which then means you have to raise $105,000 less in tax levy to balance your budget.
To shift.
Sure. Then you've got the one, on the bottom of page 154, we've got a cost shift for police administration. This is the chargeback for the police department to support patrolling and enforcement of permitted parking activity, which is based on 0.25 FTE of police officers and 0.5 FTEs of community service officers.
Actually, it's pretty low.
And, so that's about 4 hours a day patrolling permitted activity. And if we, I kinda looked at that, so that seems pretty reasonable
That means off-street parking.
for off-street parking.
Right.
Yeah.
There's nothing here that says the police officer's charged, I just wanted to let you know, so you can fix that.
Right. So, the good news is, well, I don't know if you could use bad news. In discussions about some of our Duncan service contract things, it came to our attention that the police department's operational practices have changed, and uniformed officers no longer do permit enforcements. So that 0.25 FTE is no longer applicable to be charged to the parking utility in any case. So that would be a budget adjustment I would make after the budget came out. So that's a $32,000 charge.
But they still do on-street, if we kept the on-street.
They do not do any permit enforcement
Oh,
at
that was
all.
just lots and.
It's all the CSO.
It's all the CSO, yeah. So, but from the context of this presentation, making that determination would move $105,000 of revenue
Yeah.
and $32,000 of expenditures into the general fund for a net